Hi everyone, this is Grandmaster Miguel Santos, and this weekend I was playing German Bundesliga and I was so close to reach 2600 rating back. And I played this extremely interesting strategical game, and I wanted to show you just to try to understand a bit what was happening in that game. So the game started with an Italian opening. I played here d3, bishop c5, and knight c3. With the move knight c3, one of the ideas that white has all the time is that if black wants to play d6 at any point, you might want to play knight a4, and then you are gonna pick the bishop, and you are gonna play like a long game with a pair of bishops. So a lot of times black is just playing a6, and the idea of a6 basically that if you ever play knight a4, then you can hide your bishop on a7. Also, at some point, black might want to play with b5, so I wanted to play just a4 to control this b5 possibility. And then he went for the move h6. Why does he want to play h6 before d6 in this moment? Well, if black plays d6 now, there's multiple choices here for white, of course, but one of the main ideas to play bishop g5, and after h6 and bishop h4, once you play d6, you cannot come back with your bishop to e7. So this is a very annoying pin, and sometimes black is forced to play g5, and well, simply some people doesn't really like to play with g5 because it's kind of weakening his own king. So that's why some people wants to play h6 earlier. So this position actually can be quite symmetrical, so you have to do something to make some spice in the game, and now I decided to go with bishop e3. The main idea of bishop e3, of course, is to basically create some kind of imbalance in the position. If he takes, I want to take with the f pawn, of course, no other choice. And now the f file is open, and even one more interesting thing that happens in this kind of position, especially when white is still not castle, is that you have the idea to play with king e2 or queen e2, then go h3, g4, and sometimes you can castle long and create some kind of very complicated position. And also, well, you can also play just with d4 in a somehow more normal way, right? My opponent decided to play d6 now. So after d6, I have a big decision to make, since if I just castle short here, he might want to take now, and after fe3, now of course I don't have the option to castle long anymore. So I didn't really wanted that, because then the position can somehow be a bit more dry. So I thought, okay, I'm going to take on c5, he's going to take with the d pawn, and I'm going to play knight d5. So the idea with knight d5 is that, well, if he takes and I take with the bishop and attacking the knight is defending the pawn, so it's kind of annoying for him. So he didn't really want to take, he played bishop e6, which is the move that I expected, knight e3, takes and takes. And I was quite happy with this kind of structure, this kind of position. So what is going on in this structure? Basically, once I took on c5, he takes with the pawn, and now black has more control over the center, but also he has some double pawns on the c file, and this makes basically a bit harder for black to maneuverate a bit. I'm attacking the e5 pawn, which is kind of important because this way it will be harder for him to get the knight to d4, and also it's not so easy to defend it because after knight c4, of course, one normal move is queen e7, and actually I believe is the best move, but also it's a move that is not so easy to play because you know that at some point the knight will come to e3, and at some point the knight will come to f5, and this can be annoying for black, and that's why my opponent played the move knight d7 in this position. I don't think this move is good, and actually I believe black should play queen e7, and probably after short castle you can even consider going long castle, because one of the good things that the pawn on c5 have is that now it's very hard for white to get some counterplay. If you play c3, sometimes the d3 pawn can be weak, and also to get b4 is usually not so easy because the pawn is controlling quite well, and then you can try to get some counterplay on the king side. My opponent decided to play knight d7. I believe main idea was to get his queen out from these jumps on d5 or f5. And now I simply continue with castle and short castle. And now, of course, the position is a bit more quiet, and we have to decide which plan do we have to continue with our position. So for that, we have to read a bit the structure, we have to read where do we want to put the pieces and all of that stuff, right? So let's try to understand that first. So first thing first, we have to know where do we want to put the pieces, which pieces are not well placed, and which kind of break we want to do with our pawns. So if we think about that, let's start with the possible breaks. Possible breaks in this position for white are Let's say once you play c3, you can continue with c3 b4, you can continue with c3 d4, or you can continue with f4. These three breaks are the three possible breaks that we have in this position. So you don't really want to move your c pawn, because if you actually move your c pawn to c3, then this pawn on d3 gets weaker. And if you really want to play d4 or b4, actually you're gonna help black, because they are not gonna have a double pawn on the c file anymore. So this is probably helping them more than helping you. So I knew this was not really the plan, and the plan was probably to go f4. So once I know my break is on the f4 square, I know my rook on f1 is probably well placed already, because okay, if I'm gonna break here, I probably want the rook to help this guy. And I also know that probably the knight is not well placed, because I want to play f4. So I know this rook is doing well, I know this knight on f3 is not doing so well. My knight on c4. My knight on c4 is kind of a nice piece, because it's probably gonna help him to play b5, but once he played b5, his pawns are also gonna be a bit more weak, and also my knight is kind of close to go to the king side if I want to play on f4 and then attack with that. So now that I know my opponent wants to play b5, I also know my rook on a1 is probably well placed, because once I take, I might be able to take on the a8 and then make his queen go farther from his king, so this way will get weaker. So somehow I already know my rook here is fine, my rook here is fine, my knight here is fine, my queen I'm not so sure, but it's not so clear where I want to put it, and I know my knight on f3, I probably should move it somewhere. So after considering all of that, I came to the conclusion that g3 was a very interesting idea. So it has two different ideas. Now I have the h4 square for my knight, because okay, probably want to bring this knight to f5 at some point. Also, it's like somehow a waiting move that is not helping my opponent to continue with any of his ideas, not showing really where my plan is going. And also the other idea that I have with g3 is that if I ever play f4 and he takes, I also have the option to take with the g pawn, which I might actually want to be able to control more squares. He continued with b5, and now I played knight e3. So why do I play here knight e3? Why don't I just take here and then make his queen after I take, I make his queen go a bit farther from the king, and then I continue with knight e3. This is of course possible, but there is a very important concept in chess that actually is happening after the move knight e3, which is basically favorable tension. What does this mean? This means that basically I can take here whenever I want, but black cannot do the same. Why? If black ever take here, I can just take with the rook, then all of this is weak. If black plays something like b4, then of course this square is extremely weak. I can play something like knight d2, knight c4, then continue with f4. This means that basically with white, I can take here whenever I want, but with black, you cannot really avoid that I can take on b5. So this way, by playing knight e3 first, basically my position is much more flexible, I have much more opportunities, and also black is kind of struggling, calculating, will he take the next move, will he not take the next move? So this basically keeps more option open for me. In the game, he continued with the move knight d4, and actually now is a great moment to take on b5. It might seem that it's the same, but things are quite concrete now. He has to take, I take here, he take with the queen, I take here, takes a knight f5. What happened now? Thanks to the fact that the queen is much farther, then d7 knight is weak, this guy is weak, this guy is weak, those three guys are not defended by anyone, and also I attacking here, and he's defending once. So all of this is very, very weak. And now, and also very important thing we have to realize, and this is actually something you can realize in the moment he played h3, is that the f5 square is actually very related to the fact that the pawn is on h6. Why? Because if this pawn were on h7, he could simply play g6 and then I will have to go somewhere. But since the pawn is already on h6, he can never really play g6, or at least it's very hard for him to get to play g6. So it's important to realize that f5 square and the h6 pawn are very, very related. So he might try to play king e7 to play g6 next, but also since he have so many weaknesses, now I can take and I can give this check and the knight is hanging. So this is also very bad for him. So he played knight f6. This way he controls the queen to not go to the g4 square. And now I open the position with the move f4. So the idea with f4, of course, if he takes, and you can consider any move is very interesting. Probably queen f3 followed by queen takes 4 is one of the best. And after f4, I managed to open the f file. I managed to make the guy on d4 much weaker, which is also very important because he have to worry now about multiple things. And after f4, he continued with the move queen e8. Queen e8 is normal because you want to basically bring your queen much closer to your king. And now I keep improving my pieces. Queen f3, which is also creating some threat. For instance, if you play some random move like c5, I can continue with this. Take here and take here. I win a pawn. He have some drawing chances actually after rook a8, but I was quite happy with the endgame anyway. So he played the move king h7. The idea is that if if I want to do the same now, he can simply take with the king, so there is no this idea anymore. And I have to stop a bit and try to think a bit more concretely what to do, because I already have my pieces well placed. He's kind of wanting to play g6, if not in the next move, probably quite soon, or some knight g8, f6, g6. So I have to be kind of fast, because if I don't do anything, he will probably manage to put my pieces back, and then his position will be probably quite solid. So I have multiple ideas in this position. One of the main ideas that I had was to play g4, g5, trying to attack, but then I came to the conclusion that probably this is weakening a lot my position. It's not so clear how to follow up with the attack after something like knight d7 and son f6. Like, even something like this is not so stupid, because if I ever want to take here, he has some g6, my knight have to leave, and it wasn't so easy to follow up here with the attack. And that's why at the end I came to a conclusion that b4 is a very interesting idea. And the idea with b4 is that I don't want him to play c5, because then this guy will be extremely weak. He don't really have so many moves, because you can try to play g6, but it's still not working, because after f e5, queen e5, and knight h6, the knight on f6 is still hanging. You cannot really move your rook, because there is not so many places. You can also move your knight, but probably you don't want to, because there is some queen g4 happening. So the only real move that I consider is queen e6, trying to bring the rook back to a8. Now I can take, and queen f4. And I totally forget about going for the attack, but actually the most important thing now is that this guy on d4 is extremely weak. He has to take, and I take with the rook. And now my idea is simply to take on d4. Once I take on d4, also I'll be defending the pawn on c2, I'll be attacking the pawn on b5, I'll have some ideas like simply e5, and it's basically almost impossible for black to manage to defend this guy. If you go something like rook d8, I can simply go e5 and then take the pawn with the rook. So my opponent tried to get some counterplay with rook a8, rook a2, but now it's a bit too late. e5, I attack the pawn, now f7 will be hanging. I took also on c7, I'm attacking here, attacking here, attacking here. So he tried to continue with rook b2, get some counterplay on the b4 pawn. I take on b5 and come to d6. Now it's 2 pawns up, I'm threatening some knight f5 for knight d8 idea. So he tried to defend that with king g6. And now, of course, I have multiple ways to continue in this situation, but I wanted to play solid. I didn't want to give some counterplay chances. So I thought that if I play h3, now his knight has almost no jumps. He can jump to f3, but it's not going to make a lot of damage there. And now I can simply follow with king f2, king e3, and some d4, c4, c5, just start running, right? He went rook b1, king f2, and rook h1. And suddenly, after d4, it's quite funny because this guy has no more room. He has no squares, nowhere to go. So this was the game. I hope you enjoyed the game. For me, there was, a bit of important moments. I will start with the moment where probably black should try to castle on to make somehow a more complicated position and try to get the counterplay on the queen side, because probably on the king side, white is going to do a bit better. There is also an important moment to realize, this moment with 93. Keeping the tension here on b5. Once you are the one that can, let's say, resolve the tension and not your opponent, probably you want this tension to keep on the time, right? To make it longer, so you have more possibilities and you have the possibility to take later. Also, this moment to realize that the pawn on h6 is gonna make the f5 square even weaker. And I hope you enjoy the game. I hope you enjoy the video, and see you on the next one.